Tractors taking to the streets has become a common occurrence across Europe as disgruntlement grows in the agriculture sector, and green policy is the big reason for it. A new survey of about 800 farmers has highlighted the main points of fear and frustration in the industry, with political intervention a far bigger worry than climate change. Joining me now is market researcher and the brains behind this survey, Mr. Nigel Jacklin. Nigel,
Hi.
welcome back to the Independent Republic of Mike Graham. Good to see you. You're a statistician by trade, I suppose, aren't you? You're a man that knows a thing or two about crunching the numbers.
Yes.
We've seen the farmers in Wales beginning to get a bit worked up about some of these net zero demands that are being made. We've seen, obviously, the French farmers absolutely revolting. We've seen this, the same thing happening in the Netherlands. A bit at Dover, I think, the other day as well. What is it that farmers are mostly angry about in this country?
Well, farmers just want to be left to get on with farming.
Yeah.
So their main worries are the price they get for their produce and the cost of their inputs.
Right.
The weather bothers them, climate change doesn't.
No, exactly right. Well, this is the trouble, isn't it? Because we've got governments in Europe which are kind of obsessed with net zero targets and, you know, doing away with certain types of farming, doing away with certain types of sort of field management, I suppose, for want of a better word, telling people that, you know, they can't grow food on certain days of the week, or they can't grow food on at certain times of the year. And these farmers in Europe certainly are saying, well, we can't make a living. I saw some of the French farmers saying the other day that the prices that they have to sell their produce at mean they can't actually survive.
Yeah, most farmers in the UK don't earn very much. There is a small number of large farms and they may well be doing okay.
Yeah.
But most farmers are on average or mostly below average incomes.
Right.
And the problem is that you spend the whole year growing stuff and then you sell it, you know, and you've got one chance to make your money. It's quite a big, risky business.
Right.
And they're not in it for the love of growing wheat.
No, for sure. And if you're selling to big sort of corporate supermarkets and things like that, they're fixing the prices, particularly when it comes to things like eggs and milk and dairy, cheese presumably as well, and butter, where they'll just demand to take it off your hands. And you don't really have a choice.
Yeah, and so kind of at the conference today, there were people from the office of...
What conference was this? Sorry.
So it's a Better Statistics conference about climate change. Where are we with net zero?
Right.
So there were people like from the Office of Budget Responsibility and from the Climate Change Committee, the Bank of England. And then there were people like me and someone else presenting a survey of people. And there's just this big gap kind of between where the people are and where the experts are.
Right.
The experts are convinced. The head of the Climate Change Committee explained that they've done really well in reducing carbon emissions. Yeah. But basically that's down to stopping coal power stations and going to wind farms.
Yes.
And that's an easy win. To do the rest, they've got to do really difficult stuff.
Yeah.
And actually he says they've got to go faster. But the problem is that half of people aren't convinced. And when you talk to farmers, it's really low down their agenda.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, when we talk to people in government, whenever I get the opportunity to do so, I always say to them, you know, what exactly is net zero to you? And they can't ever really answer the question. All they can ever say is, well, of course, it's when we offset as enough carbon to make sure that any carbon that's gone into the atmosphere has been, you know, somehow equalised. And it's like, yeah, well, then what? And if you say to them, what happens when you get to net zero? They don't really know the answer to that either. I saw Al Gore answering a question the other week where he claimed that as soon as we get to net zero, the Earth will stop heating up, which is plainly just rubbish, nonsense, right?
Well, it would be nice. I mean, it's just...
I don't know. I mean, I'd like to see a hotter planet.
A very narrow sort of obsession, and it kind of ignores other stuff that matters. And the environment doesn't work like that. It's not just about one thing.
No.
And if you do that, it maybe messes that up, you know.
Exactly right. And so we've seen as well sort of a bit of a rowing back by Rishi Sunak, certainly on the oil and gas exploration in the North Sea. We're being told now as well that the electric car kind of revolution is faltering because people are not convinced anymore, and they won't be convinced that it's actually safer to drive an electric car as far as the planet goes, because it's not. You know, it creates a huge problem in mining areas when trying to put together, you know, batteries for cars. It's just ridiculous. So do you think the farmers in this country will get a bit more kind of radical, shall we say, and start driving around?
Fairly quiet to date, certainly in comparison to their EU compatriots. I think it depends. So the election and the politics are quite interesting because the survey of the population compared Tories and Labour. So Labour voters were more convinced about climate change and they were more comfortable with things like banning diesel and sale of petrol cars and increasing the price of petrol. The Tory voters, those that were still left, were less happy about that, but they probably are more likely to have cars.
Yes.
So if you throw agriculture into the equation, what the experts said is that they haven't yet figured out what they can do in order to enable agricultural emissions to be reduced.
Right.
And if they do something, I mean, one of the issues that comes up is Brexit. It's not very important, but there were 3 different kinds of red tape.
Yes.
You've got Brexit, so withdrawing from Brexit is undoing of red tape, different red tape. You've got climate change red tape, and then you've got all of the other DEFRA stuff. So I think what farmers need is one set of changes that ends up with helping them.
That actually helps them to make money out of what they do for a business.
Yes, because it's a job.
Yeah, you would think that would be straightforward, but sadly not.
No, there's too much irrational interventionism.
Yeah.
And if you go back to this sort of narrow focus, it changes. That's the problem. When we talked about one thing, I mean, the other bit that came out in the conference is that, in essence, we're exporting our carbon emissions, for example, by buying solar panels made in China, made using coal power.
Right.
And so really, we're not actually reducing global net emissions. We're just doing it in China and losing our industry.
It's all a con. I mean,